We are right in the middle of the trial against Sean Diddy Combs. Puff is in court right now here in New York. I believe this is day like 4 or 5 of the testimony. Every day we're getting just minute by minute updates, new headlines, including shocking testimony from Cassie Ventura. So everyone has a hot take about what's going on in this case. But as a music journalist, as someone who's been asked by a lot of media outlets to comment on this, I had something I wanted to share with you and how we should be looking at this case and specifically the media that we're consuming. Let's get into it. Everybody's talking about USA versus Sean Combs. I'm just shocked. I mean, outlets that have never covered hip hop ever in life, all of a sudden, they're covering this case. I'm seeing just like minute by minute updates from people who are in the courtroom. So, just some quick background. As everybody knows, Puffy is on trial. It is a federal trial around specific charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, as well as transportation around prostitution. I'm not a lawyer, so that's me paraphrasing, but that's what this case is about. Cassie Ventura has been the star witness for the prosecution. She gave lengthy testimony. And after that, Dawn Richard from Dandy Kane, she also testified. And we're just going through a bunch of different witnesses, from former assistants, people who were, allegedly involved in the freak-offs, things like that. It's very early. I think we're barely on like day 5 of testimony. The estimation I've seen is about an 8-week trial. Some of you might be wondering, like, why aren't we seeing actual recording, either audio or video from the case? And this is a federal trial, and that's just a part of a federal proceeding. So what you're seeing with updates, and there are people who are at the courthouse. I believe if you, go early enough, get in line, like you can enter the courthouse. And there are many journalists who are there, as well as content creators, fans, trolls, everyone who's in the courthouse. So that's why you're going to see a little bit of a distinction in everyone's reporting, because the way that they're reporting is actually writing down what's going on. So that's one thing that you have to kind of keep in mind, is we're getting everything secondhand. And in this video, I'm not going to go through sort of like my hot takes on the trial. I feel like there's enough of those. And I have been asked by a few, news outlets to speak about it, which I have. But what I really wanted to underscore is how important following credible sources is in this trial. When I tell you the amount of fake news I've seen, editorializing, people inserting themselves into this narrative for no reason other than, I don't know, ego or getting clicks, like it's mind-boggling. And I understand that, the algorithm loves sort of riling people up, and the more sensational, the better. But this is a very serious case. This has repercussions, not just on Puffy legally, but on many, alleged victims' lives. And you notice I said alleged victims. That's intentional, because at the end of the day, when you are reporting about a legal matter, words matter. And words like alleged, allegations, like all of those things are incredibly important and intentional. So even when I speak about it, offhand on this channel, I just try to be super mindful of what are the facts and making a distinction when I am adding my thoughts and opinion as an industry insider or journalist versus what's actually going on and what are the facts. And I think that nuance and that sensitivity is just not there right now. Even for myself, I have to be very, very mindful. Okay, let me follow credible news outlets. And I'm just going to shout out some now. I'm going to put some links in the description as well of where I'm gathering information. So NBC News is doing live updates. You can go on their page where they're actually just updating as every single witness comes on the stand, is being examined, cross-examined, things like that. The the New York Times as well. Those are two places. And on the audio side, I've been listening to 2020. So they've been doing a podcast where they actually have not just reporters embedded, but also they speak to actual lawyers. So, for example, the prosecution who went after R. Kelly, actual defense attorneys, and they're able to provide just a level of expertise and an angle that, most of us just don't have. Like, I'm not a lawyer. My knowledge of the law is pretty much, relegated to what Law and Order is doing that week. So I like to hear from people who this is what they do all the time. And insofar as the music industry, just be really mindful. It's funny. Everyone seems to be a hip hop expert now, and everyone knows the business. And I'm like, I've been in the industry for like 20 years and I've never heard of you. So this isn't true. You definitely were not there. So just be really, really discerning on who you're listening to. And even when it comes to the podcast space, I mean, we already know, like, the hip hop podcast space is, kind of a cesspool, but they know what's going to get clicks, like being calm and serious and treating this case with the sensitivity, the respect, and the dignity that it deserves. It's not going to get clicks. Like, even in this video, if I was jumping up and down saying crazy stuff, I put like a graphic that's, clearly made by AI, that would get a lot of clicks. But some of us actually have professional credibility, and we're trying to maintain some semblance of journalistic ethics, even though, this is an emotional trial. It affects people who've been following Puff since, they were a kid, and all of the music of Bad Boy and all of that stuff. So I get it. Like, emotions are high. People are being triggered. Like, I totally understand it. But especially when you are speaking out publicly and you have if you're an authority, right? Like, not just a random person with a mic, I think you have to be very, very mindful how you're speaking about this case, because it can have ramifications and possibly be a watershed moment for like this hip hop Me Too moment. We don't know. So what I really wanted to say in this video, please, please, please consider the source. Like, sometimes fake news doesn't hurt people, but I think in this case, it's just very clear that some of the things we were hearing even last year, right? The allegations of the baby oil being laced, or all of these minor victims, all of these things, I would tell people, go read the indictment. That's not anywhere. And now that testimony from witnesses is corroborating it. Or even the aspect, when I would be asked, did everyone know about freak-offs? Is a puffy party a freak-off? And I would say, no, there's a distinction. The white party in the Hamptons is not a freak-off. A freak-off is something that took place in a very intimate space. So people who knew Puffy in an intimate way, right? Basically someone who was involved with him romantically, that's something that you would have to talk to them about, right? But painting this broad brush against hip hop or against pop culture or music or entertainment, I think is really irresponsible. Now, look what's going on. When you look at the witnesses for the prosecution, it's all people that were involved with Puffy in intimate spaces, whether it be a former romantic partner like Cassie. Just recently, one of his assistants, he testified, and he was the personal assistant. This is the person who woke Puff up in the morning and, was with him all day until he went to bed. That's very different from, let's say, someone who was in a business meeting with Puffy, or an artist who only was relegated to working with him in the studio. So again, details matter, because otherwise what ends up happening is real victim stories and real narratives about the abuse of power, misogyny, even homophobia, which I think this case has a lot of those things baked in. We're not able to see that and parse it out and have real conversations. People are too busy making no Diddy jokes or throwing out things that have nothing to do with the other, throwing in celebrity names. We don't need to make this more salacious. These are serious enough allegations and alleged crimes. So I'm going to put those resources down below. If there are people that you're following, either, individuals or outlets that are vetted, they're fact checked, and always think about when it comes to what is the intention. Because I know there are some independent content creators, for lack of a better term, who are at the courthouse and they are doing live updates. And I'm going to presume that everything is done in good faith. But remember, like, this is just a one-off person and they are getting paid for your clicks. So it behooves them to sort of get stuff out fast, throw in their hot takes. Like, the more clicks, the better. So I would just advise when possible. And I know things move fast. Like I said, there's no recordings that are available to the public at this point because it is a federal trial. So even like the biggest news outlets like NBC will share one update, the New York Times will share something else, just based on what their reporters thought was important, right? So I would say in this case, maybe more than even others, try going to a couple of different sources just so you're sort of getting a full picture. And if you do want to go to people who are commenting, they're throwing in their 2 cents, sometimes with humor or, whatever, I think that's fine. But the basics must be that you know the facts. And I could tell from the way certain people were talking about this, even now, right? Like, this isn't a domestic violence case. Like, this is a different type of a case. Is domestic violence a part of it? And that's something that the prosecution, I believe, wants to show as part of a culture that was going on. Yes, but, a lot of people are like, convict him for domestic violence or for minors, and that's nowhere in the indictment. So I think there's plenty here that the prosecution feels they have to work with. As I said, this is supposed to be like an 8-week trial. And when it's done, Puffy will be judged by a jury of his peers. I do think it's interesting to look at the makeup of the jury. So that's something to be mindful of. It's 8 men, 4 women. It actually skews a bit older. And there is reporting on sort of the occupation of each of the jurors, as well as sort of their demographic information, which I find interesting. But to me, those are the things that are more illuminating than, just like the jokes or just random people who are, sort of in Puff's orbit and kind of using this for clout or for their own fame. Like, again, this is a very serious trial. We're talking about actual people who have been harmed physically, mentally, emotionally. And I just think that this deserves to, be treated with respect. And I think if you're somebody who watches this channel, you are someone who does want to be informed, in the know. And in this case, more than ever, like, facts matter. So I'm going to put those links down in the description. If there's any others that you think I should be following, definitely let me know in the comments.